Welcome back to the 8th plot. We're doing another Minecraft video today, and as you can see, we're back building the Ark, continuing this massive construction project that I've got myself into, where we're attempting to build the Ark from Stolen Futures. And yes, it's a very, very labour-intensive, very time-consuming one. And today, what I'm doing is building the sides of the lower section of the Ark. So this is the bit where all the water would be that the Ark attempted to suck up when it was when it crashed into planet Earth. But I'm not just doing that, which is just a back and forth, laying the blocks one after the other. It takes a lot of time. I'm also going to build a sort of moat around the Ark. You see, when it landed in Iceland, ship crashed, and well, not crashed really. It's a crash landing, I guess you would say. The lower section pierces the crust of the planet, makes it all the way down to the mantle, where all the magma is that bubbles up through each volcano on Earth. And by doing so, it sort of splits Iceland open a little bit. Well, a little bit more than Iceland is already split open, because it's it's between two continental plates. And lava fills that space around the Ark. So the Ark, once it's landed, sort of sits in a pool of lava while it tries to suck up water. And after we capture it, which makes getting to it kind of difficult I guess in the story, in the events leading up to the main story, which I'm actually going to sort of chronicle for you today. While you're watching my avatar build the sides of the Ark and complete the lower section, what I'm going to read to you is a short story that I've written. It's not part of the main story. What it is it's the life of Bae. Bae is the South Korean representative on board the Ark, so she was the one chosen to represent South Korea when the planet went kaboom, and she was designated the survivor of that entire country. So I've started writing short stories from as many of the Arkanauts as I can, of their time prior to getting on the Ark. The main story follows Callum Tusker, the English representative, but there are other representatives too, and I wanted to tell their stories from their time learning that they were going to survive the destruction of Earth, and to the point where they came on board the Ark. And considering the fact that the whole world is losing its oceans, that massive environmental damage has been done, huge collapse of civilization, it seemed like there would be some very interesting stories to tell, especially from all around the world. So, what I'm going to do, these stories are written from Callum's perspective. He's like hearing them. He's hearing these other characters tell them. So it's going to be sort of the narrator's voice as is his, but Bae will be recounting her story of her time before coming on board the Ark. So please watch my avatar do this massive construction project in the background while you listen to this short story, Bae's story. Okay, let's get into it. So I was there for over a month, safe and secure. It was quite possibly the most depressing time of my life, now that I think about it, I said to Bae. I had just finished telling her the story of how I learned that I had a place on the Ark, and my life from that point right up to the end of the world. We were both in the water recycling plant on the ship, fixing a leaky pipe. The air smelled of mild cleansing chemicals, and a low-level hum provided drab background noise. That was coming from the various pumps keeping our water flowing. Not a very exciting story, I added. I grabbed a giant wrench from a nearby toolbox and placed it on the nut I needed to tighten. After jimmying a bit to make it fall into the grooves properly, I then started pulling down the tool to make sure the new pipe I had just attached was tight and waterproof. When I finished, I nodded to Bae, who turned a valve to get the water flowing again. Instantly, I was sprayed with water from the pipe fitting I had just completed. I raised my hand to block the water that went straight into my face, stinging my skin as it was under high pressure. Bae just watched for a moment, somewhat surprised at the problem. Something is still wrong, she said. I know! I shouted at her, and she finally turned the valve with a screwdriver and the water stopped. I looked at the pipe and wondered what was wrong with it. What about that washer? Bae said, pointing at the circle of rubber at my feet. I sighed inwardly at my carelessness and started undoing the nut on the pipe so I could insert the washer. There was silence for a moment as I worked, as water dripped from my face, and Bae waited for me to undo the pipe and complete the work. You said boring, she suddenly said. What? I replied, and ran my fingers through my hair to slick it back over my head. It was getting very long, and I was wondering what I should do with it. Could a robot on board the ship cut it for me? Could one? I was certainly not going to let one of the other crew members do it. You said your story from meeting Dr. Ghost to your last moments on Earth was boring. However, you were kidnapped, and you had your eye cut open. Not quite. I was just left with a scar, I said, and I ran the end of the wrench from where my scar started above my eye down to my cheek. Whatever. Either way, not a boring story, she reiterated. It felt boring as I was telling it, but that might be because I've told it a few dozen times. What about your story? I remember you saying that you were on a ship towards the end of the world. Yes, for the most part. For a time I was in the same fleet as Nuan, except on a South Korean vessel. So what happened, I asked her. Oh, where to begin, she mumbled. Start from where Dr. Ghost came to get you, I suggested, and I continued my work while she talked. Well, my family lived on a fishing boat, and while we were out fishing, Dr. Ghost came to us on a government ship. Odd. He had me collected, I said. I think he chose to come to us at sea because it's more private and secret. Certainly less eyebrows would be raised if he came and got me, or more eyebrows would be raised if he came and got me at a harbour. Anyway, his ship flagged down my family's and he came aboard. I was 13 at the time, and he sat with my parents down in the cabin and talked to them. I wasn't there for that conversation. However, I was watching from the bow, looking through the cabin window and seeing their reaction. First they were shocked, then they looked angry, as he calmly explained to them what was going to happen. He exposed the lies regarding the Ark that they had been told, that we had all been told. And then finally I was called in, and he gave me the good/bad news. Next came all, the stuff that we all went through, the memory implants, and I adapted to the new situation and the training that they gave us. And from that point on, my parents were incredibly dedicated to getting me on the Ark safe and sound. Once they understood that I would be teleported to the Ark, they decided that getting me away from other people was the best option. The sea levels were starting to drop rapidly at this point, and food was becoming scarce. They reckoned that people would start tearing the world apart, and they didn't want me to be anywhere near the chaos. So we loaded our boat with supplies and planned to hide out on the sea for the next several months, until the teleport would happen. It took time to get out to our boat, because the sea levels had dropped just enough for it to almost be beached about a mile off the shore. So when we were ready to leave civilization behind, we had to trek with our supplies through a valley that had once been the sea floor. Barnacles and coral were everywhere, little rock pools were overloaded with crabs and fish, and they were drying out in the sun. It was a weird journey. Once we reached the boat, we set off. There were other vessels around us too, however no one else wanted to go out to sea, it seemed. They were too scared of the destroyer and its tentacle-like pipes that threatened to suck up unsuspecting boats. My family have always been fishermen, so my parents felt safer on the sea. They felt they could stay away from much of the danger. And having a virtually flat horizon meant that they could see trouble coming from far away, but also fish if needs be. You see, fishing was becoming much easier. As sea levels dropped, fish became concentrated in certain areas. We had no problem catching anything and getting extra food that way. So we floated around the South China Sea. Every day we would sight another ship on the horizon, and my parents would steer clear. However, as the months passed, we saw more ships every day, until we realized what was happening. All the ships on the sea and oceans were being herded together. A sort of new sea was developing, and every vessel trying to stop itself from being beached was heading for it. This small sea shrank to the size of, Lake Victoria, I guess, and almost every type of ship was there. Tankers, liners, military vessels, and even submarines unable to submerge. My parents were nervous. We had tried to get away from civilization, but civilization was coming back to us. Larger ships grouped together, forming ad hoc communities. We actually passed by a big Chinese aircraft carrier. That must have been the one was on. Things stabilized for a while because this new sea wasn't having its water sucked up by a pipe from the destroyer. But eventually the ship found out about this patch of water that it had not sucked up, and it sent a pipe to it, and it started shrinking again. The sea life was becoming packed. Around our vessel were whales, dolphins, seals, sharks, all day long. They were gorging themselves on fish that had nowhere to go. We ate very well on the larger sea creatures. We must have wiped out whole species. There was a downside, though. As the sea started to shrink, the larger carnivores gorged themselves on their prey. We spent days floating on a literal Red Sea. Not the Red Sea next to Egypt, a red one filled with blood. The rotting carcasses of sea animals produced a huge miasma over the shrinking sea. I never got used to it, even though my parents said I would. They refused my request to beach the ship and walk away from this sea of death. Eventually, though, the water was almost gone. This was causing problems because the bigger vessels were losing space to maneuver and float. Plus, without a dry dock, when they finally came to rest on the seabed, they would not stay upright. One day we were beside a large ocean liner, and suddenly the whole vessel stops. It doesn't float anymore. There's a massive sound of creaking metal. It finally hit the sea floor as the water continued to be sucked away. The ship literally had no support for its massive bulk, and we were right next to it. She held up a hand to represent the larger ship, and her own with the other hand. The whole thing listed to one side towards us. She then started to tilt her hand, showing a collapsing ship. Can you imagine it? Thousands of tons of metal falling your way. My dad threw our ship's engine into fall. We tried to outrun it. Our ship's engines were not very good, but thankfully it didn't need to be, as the liner pushed a bow wave ahead of it. We kind of surfed on it. From on board the liner we heard screams and shouts and a cacophony of crashing glass. Loungers on the top deck came flying off. The ship crashed onto its side as our vessel spread away. My parents didn't look back, not daring to go and help in case we had to take on guests we couldn't trust. We all rationalized leaving them there with this one piece of wisdom. Why bother to save them? They were dead anyway. All that mattered was keeping me safe. So a month before the end, my dad beached the ship. We had no choice, hoping that this way we could stay away from the other ships. We spent the next few weeks watching the water's edge disappear into the horizon. We saw all the remaining vessels still afloat start to cluster together until it looked like a new city had formed. 2 weeks before the end, that city erupted into chaos. We never learned what happened. Maybe, tensions had built. With all the water gone and all the food gone, people were fighting for whatever was left over. One of the ships was a warship, and it exploded in the middle of the night. It lit up the horizon like a sun, and it took out nearby ships in the small city. We assumed someone had accidentally, or even maybe purposely, detonated its weapons store. The city became a smoking ruin. Then a few days later, people started making a long trek across the seafloor away from the ruined vessels. There was obviously no hope for them in the city anymore, and I guess they thought going somewhere else might help. Scores of them were walking across what was now a seabed, passing by our little vessel, which was now sitting in the middle of a desert. We had water and food stored up on our ship, and we rationed it carefully. My parents did nothing to help any of the people who trudged past. In fact, when a group of people would get close, we would hide. The ship had a high hull, so it discouraged people from climbing on board, and they wouldn't see us. My father kept telling me to be quiet, not to move, to let them pass by. We knew they were dead men walking, and giving them our rations would do nothing. In the final week, although we didn't know it was the final week, my parents stopped eating. They told me to eat and drink, to keep my strength up. They knew the time was close for me to go, however they didn't know exactly. They starved themselves without knowing if they would be suffering for a week, 2 weeks, or possibly even a month. Bay paused in her story, and I knew why. She was coming up to the day when they were all teleported aboard the Ark. In those days, I knew she had to watch her parents waste away. She sniffed a little. So they changed a lot. My parents became sickly and weak. They could barely move. I had to force them to eat and pour water down their throats. They tried to resist. They wanted me to have it all, but I couldn't watch them die. We had nothing to do but wait. We tried playing games, yet in their weakened state they could barely concentrate or think. On the second to last night, with my parents lying on the floor of the cabin, I lay down next to them, holding their hands. They couldn't get up to sit on the ship's more comfortable seats. We just lay there, in a silence, on the cabin floor. My mother, I think she was in a delusional state, started asking me about the past. She kept asking if I remembered old holidays people we used to live with. For some reason she assumed I was still seeing an old boyfriend of mine. I reminisced with them, even though it was very sad, a very tortured moment where I almost pretended that everything was fine. And we all fell asleep dwelling on the past. I woke up the next morning and they didn't. "I'm sorry," I said. She sniffed and wiped a tear. and breathed deeply. They were gone. I looked over their dead, shriveled, emaciated bodies for a while, then retreated to the top deck. I didn't have the energy to mourn them at that time. I ate and drank all the water on board. I finished off everything in like an hour. I grew angry as I found myself alone in a desert that stank of rotting sea life and some rotting people. It was all too much. And then the earthquakes began. The boat started to sink into the sand, which was now becoming partially fluid with the vibrations. I climbed onto the very top deck and looked out over the sea. Well, what was left of it. Dark clouds filled the sky. The top of the destroyer was barely visible on the horizon. My body started to tingle as the teleport took hold and the world started to fade. The last thing I saw was a huge rent forming on the sea floor. The destroyer's engines were splitting the planet. The city of ships on the horizon fell into it, and the crack reached out from my vessel. And just in time, I was plucked by the teleport off the ship onto this vessel, safe from harm. And she gestured around to the Ark. She fell silent as her story had ended. I didn't say anything immediately. I mean, what else was there to say? My experiences were better, that was for sure. So I put the pipe with its washer in place and tightened the nuts. I looked at Bay and she pulled herself out of her sadness and turned the valve just like before. No water shot out to drench me. Our job was done. I don't know what to say, I finally said. She chucked the screwdriver she had been using into the toolbox. It bounced and clanged against the other metal tools. She shrugged. Who does? She replied. And there we go. That's Bay's story from her time before getting on board the Ark. I started writing more. We've got a few. I've got one by Ilarion. I've got one by Luciana. Ilarion's from Russia, Luciana's from Colombia, and I think I've got another one as well. I can't remember. Cortez, that's it. Cortez from France. So, thanks for listening to that short story. As you can see, the video is nearing its end. What I've done, if you want to know like the ins and outs of Minecraft of doing it, you use World Edit mod, and what it allows you to do is essentially remove all the blocks above you from whatever level you're standing on. So I chose a level around the Ark, and I just went around and you just type in using World Edit, remove above, and then you select how many blocks, and it sort of does it in a sort of square around you, obviously. So you saw me go all the way around, erasing, creating this flat plane around the Ark. And then I filled it with lava using World Edit again. You use like a brush, it's fill option, and you have to get 2 coordinates, and that coordinate is the area which is filled with it. I'm glad this worked, because I thought that the lava would just fall down and it would fill up, like lava would fill up a sort of basin as it was that I'd formed around the Ark. But it's not. Some of this lava is literally hovering where it is. But it's come out exactly how I wanted it. As the video is panning out, you can see that I created other cracks around it. So I had this square moat that didn't look right. The Ark wouldn't create that when I had to visualize a giant rent in the landscape. So I went around and created more cracks around it. So it does look like the Ark smashed into Iceland and just rent the entire country apart. Well, the best I can do using Minecraft, which is of course squared off, so you can't get that. You can't always get a nice sort of rounded visual aesthetic. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for listening to the Bay story. Stay tuned for more Minecraft videos, more work on the Ark. There is still so much more to do. I've got to fill in everything, and even try and figure out a way to put some sea life in that underside. Maybe that'll look good. I don't know if I will enclose it off. I might not do the upper sides. I might leave it as it is so you can easily look into it. I don't know. Maybe I'll do 2 versions, one without it and like a tour of it, and one with it so it looks complete. There we go. The Ark surrounded by a moat of lava, as it would almost look if everything was real. But thankfully it's not real. A giant alien ship has not crashed into Earth and tried to steal our water. There we go. Please like and subscribe if you're liking this series of videos. Obviously, please go check out the books themselves. I didn't really put any spoilers into that short story, so I've not given anything away with the main plot. So please go have a read of Stolen Futures. Leave those reviews. spread the word about the book series, and that'd be great. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Goodbye.